What is the cause of group conflict today? I could say it's dependent on resources, status seeking, or perspective. This is true. I could say it's harbored in the paradox of the relationship between cooperation and conflict. This is also true. But what I can't say is whether or not tribalism has manifested itself in the same way today as it has in our past. While the balancing act between individual interests and group interests is still very much alive, tribalism is definitely nowhere close to what it once was. Still, group identity runs rampant. It splits factions, causes wars, and is ultimately responsible for a lot of the division we witness today. But it's different. It's warped. It's no longer born out of immediate survival or necessary cooperation, at least in the West. It's taken a new form, a new medium, a different spirit. One born out of social costs, ideological identity, and ambiguity. All that come together in this perfect blend to embody a pathological state, one that possesses the soul and one that closes the mind. And yet, it seems like a problem people have only half-heartedly, if ever, attempted to tackle. There are many reasons for this, but the best reason I can think of is because it's hard. We say we want objective truth, but our actions suggest otherwise. We say we want to listen to people with different ideas, but only bond with those who share similar opinions. And when push comes to shove, the reality is we want the presence of outgroups. We want an enemy, somebody to compete against, a villain to our hero. Contrary to what we may think, adversity is what gives us meaning. But as with all things, this can go too far. And so my question is, how has social media affected tribalism? In this series, we've laid out the different elements that contribute to division. We've talked about perspective and how misinformation can actually aid in survival. We've talked about group dynamics and the intricate balancing act that needs to be maintained for a group to function. But what we haven't talked about is social cost. In evolutionary biology, social cost refers to any negative impact experienced by an individual as a result of behaviors within a group. At its core, it reflects the intricate web of trade-offs that come with living in a community. See, while cooperation and group living in general create benefits for everybody, they undoubtedly come with significant costs as well. Costs that affect individuals differently. On average, those who incur the most social cost are rewarded the most by their community. Think about it this way. The chimpanzee that runs to the defense of his or her underlings will be rewarded with more status or loyalty or resources for protecting others who may not be able to protect themselves. But the thing about social cost is that it comes in many different flavors, so to speak. It can come from honest signals, but it can also be derived from dishonest signals. And just like in my video on tribalism, groups have to remain wary of outsiders to create loyalty and ultimately unity. But that doesn't mean they aren't continually testing their own members as well, to make sure they're still committed to the shared goals of the group. Things change, people change, individuals age, they get bigger, they get stronger, and in the case of humans, there are hundreds of other factors that can make people leave one community for another. And so the loyalty of the members in a tribe has to be continually tested for. I mean, betrayal is a very real phenomenon. Of course, this testing leads to another drawback, tribal biases. Although loyalty has some nobility associated with it, the significant drawback that comes with it is sound reasoning. And this is very well documented. It doesn't matter what group or political party you reside in, we all positively approach information that supports our tribe's biases, but are very skeptical of information that comes from the other groups, even if it is objectively true. Tribes, or I guess I should say groups, distort the truth in two fundamental ways. First, through signals. Whether we like it or not, beliefs display loyalty to those around us. When we express opinions, we are signaling our intention to behave in ways that align with our community. What that means is that expressed beliefs act as indicators of one's loyalty to a particular group or a particular ideology. And this is just my hunch, but I think the theory of honest signaling can be applied to group dynamics as well. Honest signaling is a theory that stems from sexual selection. The idea suggests that negative traits are more indicative of an individual's genetic quality because they can't be faked. So as an example, the larger the male peacock's tail, the more attractive it is to females. And that's because if it can survive with such a heavy burden, then it must be fit genetically, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to survive. This negative trait, this costly trait, is an honest signal of the male peacock's quality. And I think that this same idea can apply to tribe dynamics. If someone has a belief that they fight severely for, say for example in the way they display emotions, getting angry and louder and more aggressive, it's costly. It's costly because it's not really something that can be faked, and it comes with negative consequences in the face of the other group's eyes. So as a result, This display functions as an honest signal of loyalty to the group, as it demonstrates how strongly one is dedicated to their group's ideology regardless of consequences. It has a social cost. Now, I'm sure you're already aware, but it's pretty obvious how something like this can quickly distort an individual's perspective on the world. Groupthink can be a very dangerous thing, and it's not uncommon to conform to the ideas of the majority of those around you. I mean, the bystander effect has documented this quite well. But anyway, the group rewards the individuals that incur the most social cost. And honest signaling of your support for an ideology is one way we can incur social costs. The next step then would be to prove loyalty by continually incurring these social costs in the form of conforming to different positions all within a group's bias, a pattern that will inevitably lead to the distortion of truth. But there's another factor at play here as well. In my last video, I talked about how tribes establish unity by penalizing free riders but rewarding loyalty. So not only do groups reward those who share their ideologies, but they also penalize those who don't. Meaning, if you want to be part of this group, you have to conform. And when you do conform, your perspective on truth is effectively wrong. I mean, after all, continuously defecting to your group's position, regardless of what's happening around you, is the biggest hallmark of ideological possession. So that's all great, but we have to ask the question, how does this apply to the age of social media? Echo chambers are a well-documented characteristic of social media. This is in part because of us, in part because of the specifically tailored algorithms, and in part because of the selection pressure content creators are going through. But I already have a full video on this, so the echo chambers bit is what I'm going to focus on. Think of these echo chambers as closed systems where other opinions are excluded by omission, causing beliefs to become amplified, reinforced, and eventually more extreme. Similar to the tribe mentality I laid out earlier, those with differing opinions will be harassed until they either leave or no longer comment, while those with similar opinions will have their voices reinforced through positive attention, which will ultimately create a positive feedback loop and keep the cycle going. As far as I can tell, there is no solution to these echo chambers. They're just extensions of tribalism and fall prey to the same dynamics. I mean, without compromising on core democratic principles. So I think instead, we have to solve where they come from. And I don't just mean in the basic sense of, oh, it's just an extension of group dynamics. But more so, what conditions lead to echo chambers becoming the predominant method of information seeking on social media? And in trying to solve this question, I think I have an answer: ambiguity. If you think about it, most arenas with a high level of polarization occur in situations where the answer is not straightforward. And that's just coupled with the fact that solutions often come with a hidden cost. So when the truth is ambiguous, or I should say not known, tribal biases are more powerful because the truth isn't clear. I mean, it's not like anyone argues whether or not trees exist because it's obvious. So what happens is people just automatically conform to the identity of their group because there's an obvious benefit to it, but no immediate cost. What isn't explained, though, is why people don't have the rational ability to step back and analyze things with a clear head. And why people don't just admit to not knowing the answer. And I think it's because this ambiguity lies within the context of a conflict. Humans are not designed, so to speak, to be humble. We're designed to conform. These ambiguous situations could have dire consequences. Most of the time they don't, but that's how we perceive them. And group cohesion was at least directly correlated with survival. So if there's no obvious answer, and you gain a benefit from being loyal to your group, and there's no immediately recognizable trade-off, why wouldn't you immediately conform to the group's bias? On top of that, if you don't, you're going to get shunned. You're going to get punished. So it's in an individual's best interest to conform, regardless of what the position is. And I think that's why Nietzsche said, insanity in the individuals is rare, but in groups it is the rule. It's because individuals are incentivized. They don't really have a good reason not to conform ideologically. But the optimistic point in this for me is that all of it stems from incentives. It's not that we can't do it, it's just that we don't have a good reason to do it. Everything from how we perceive things, to tribalism, to individual interests, to group interests, all of it stems from what is in the best interest of the individual. And I think this is what holds the key to overcoming tribalism. And in my final video in the series, I'll put forth my theory on hopefully how this can be done. Until next time, cheers.